Hello, welcome to Triggered Care. I'm Alex, and today I want to talk about sexual assault so content warning on that. I was looking at my YouTube analytics, and my most popular videos have to do with my sexual assault experiences. So what that's telling me is that survivors are taking the most value out of me sharing my feelings around sexual assault. So today I'm going to be breaking down the sexual assault experience from my point of view as a survivor and kind of going through the feelings that I go through during an assault and afterwards. So let's get right into this. I've been experiencing a lot of flashbacks lately, along with my analytics telling me that this is what people want to hear about. So it's given me a lot to kind of think about. I've been talking to other survivors about it, and it seems very relatable. So during a sexual assault experience, it's usually with somebody that I know, whether that's a friend or a significant other. And when I'm with this person and it starts going in that direction, the first thoughts that kind of pop into my head is, this is really weird. When they are being aggressive, when they are turning things sexual, when I don't want them to be sexual, the first thought is, this is weird. And I think it's important to realize that while you're going through a traumatic experience, you are not going to think to yourself, oh, I'm being traumatized right now. Because that's not how we register trauma. The first feeling, or the first blues clues, if you will, that something bad is happening isn't, oh, this is bad. It's, oh, this is weird. And I don't know what to do. Because what that weird feeling is shock. And it's your brain going into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And for me, I am mostly going to freeze in that spot. If my history has shown me anything, it shows me that I am more predisposed to freezing than anything else. And when I freeze, I get nonverbal. So it's very difficult for me to voice anything. And that is a valid response, because we do not get to pick how our body reacts to trauma. So if you're freezing, that's going to mean that it's going to be really hard to say anything, which unfortunately with predatory people, they take that quietness as consent, even though it's not. Consent needs to be enthusiastic, and if you freeze and can't talk, that is not consent. And so then during the experience, I pretty much wait till it's done. My brain is just being like, all right, just let him do what he's going to do, and it should be done soon. And it very much becomes that waiting game of just hoping that it's over as quickly as possible. And then afterwards, I am scared. I'm very, very scared. And then my response can change into a fawn response, or it will stay stuck in that freeze response. And the reason why I fawn afterwards, or why that's a reaction that I can have, is because during childhood, I was conditioned to fawn after my abusers in order to reduce the harm that I experienced. Because my brain gets into that survival logic of, oh, this person has hurt me. If I'm nice to them, they'll stop hurting me. Or if I'm nice to them, it won't be as bad as if I try to fight it. And so I will do whatever I can in order to separate safely. Because when you think about it, predators are terrifying and intimidating. So even if they don't overtly say, if you try to fight me or if you argue with me, I will kill you, that is the fear that is there with that energy, with that aggression that they are showing you is, I'm willing to hurt you to get what I want. So it is very natural afterwards to be like, oh, you're the greatest, you're the best, and try to reassure them that you are not going to hurt them because you don't want them to hurt you. And then afterwards, when I do finally get away from that environment, the first feelings that will hit me are shame and that self-victim blaming and the questioning myself of, why am I so stupid? Why did I trust this person? Why did I put myself in that position? Like, if I didn't want to be sexualized, I would have just avoided the entire thing altogether. And that then leads to that thought process of, this is all my fault. And that is hammered in by my childhood experiences of taking on all the responsibility for anything bad that happened to me, along with the societal stigmatization of rape survivors of, well, if you don't want to get raped, you need to dress a certain way. You need to be mindful of where you're drinking and how you're drinking. You need to be mindful of men and their need to assault people, apparently. And so with my own trauma experiences on top of the way that society talks about it, it's very easy for me to blame myself and take on that responsibility myself and be like, oh, well, it was my fault that I was hurt like that. It was my fault that I got sexualized like that. And so once I take on that responsibility, the next thing that my brain will go to is, we need to forget about this. We need to just completely just not think about it. We need to get this out of our head, which will then bleed into the hypersexuality issues that I've spoken on before. We need to distract. We need to keep busy. We need to overwork. Pretty much, I need to over-distract myself to not deal with that traumatic experience that I just went through. And so when there's people who do the hypotheticals of like, well, if I was sexually assaulted, I'd call the police right away, I feel like they're not grasping what that does to your brain and how saying things like that is actually victim blaming the people who are being assaulted, because that is not the first thing that's ever popped up into my brain after an assault. I've never been assaulted and was like, oh, I got to call the police now, because of that low self-esteem, along with my habit of taking on responsibility for things that aren't my responsibility. And something that somebody said to me in the last couple months has kind of really helped me process that out more, because I was sharing with somebody a sexual assault experience that happened to me in June of this last year. And they asked me, they're like, well, did you call the police? And I kind of just laughed at that and was like, no, like, do you know how many people have assaulted me and how long of a list I would have to give the police of like, oh yeah, this person's assaulted me and this person, like, no, I didn't do that. And this person responded with, well, I would hate to think that you're letting a rapist out on the streets. And a response to that is, he is not my responsibility. It is his responsibility to not hurt people. It is his responsibility to regulate his emotions. And I, on an ethical and moral stance, don't agree with the justice system. So I'm not going to utilize that justice system in that way because I don't agree with it. I think that if we throw rapists and whoever into the prison system and they have a year to 3 years in there, and that is if the justice system listened to women in the slightest bit, which around here they don't. But let's say that they did. Let's say I could report people and actually depend on the law enforcement to believe me in the first place. And even if they did get imprisoned, what experience are they going through then? They are learning how to be more aggressive. They are learning how to have less empathy, because that is the prison environment. That's what the prison environment encourages, is more of a survivalist mindset. So then when they are released back into society, they will have even more aggression. They will understand boundaries even less because they've had to have harsh boundaries in that environment. So in order for them to actually assault people less, they need to learn how to regulate their emotions, which is not the prison environment thing. That's not teaching them how to regulate their emotions. That's just pretty much punishing them in a punitive way that doesn't teach them life lessons or mental health in the slightest. It's kind of just adding hurt onto what they're already feeling, along with telling them, no, you should be stoic, you should be disconnected from life, which then in turn would cause more assaults to happen. Now, how I've responded to sexual assaults in the last year or two, because it's changed. I used to just not respond to it at all and not talk about it at all, and I'm much more verbal about it now. When somebody assaults me, afterwards, I will send them a long message explaining how they broke my boundaries, how they took what they wanted without my consent, why that's wrong, and why I will no longer be in contact with them. Which is the best way I can think of so far to actually address it, is to have that one last conversation with them of, hey, I put down these boundaries and you went against that and you assaulted me. When a person tells you that they're not comfortable with something, you need to listen and keep that in mind. Like, just consider that. And, you know, the responses to that aren't always the greatest, but I think it's worth having that last conversation with them, and not a conversation like it's open-ended where will continue to talk to them as they try to victim blame you, but just saying out loud, you hurt me, and due to that, I no longer trust you. And I know that's super intimidating and super scary, and it's not the easiest, but it's how I go about it. And I also want to say that no matter what your reaction is to being assaulted, it's valid. If you want to go to the police and go through the justice system, that is your right. And I don't judge anyone for reacting to an assault the way that they react to it. If you utilize that, that is your choice. That is your right. I'm just sharing how I've dealt with it and how that's sort of changed over time. I also want to point out that anger is really hard to access after being assaulted. For me, it's never been a first feeling after getting assaulted of like, oh, I'm angry at this person. I very much first blame myself and put all that responsibility onto myself. And even after I process it, and I'm like, oh, wait, this person hurt me. That was their responsibility to respect me, and they didn't. Even then, it can be hard for me to access that anger, because then I still have empathy for, oh, well, they don't know how to regulate their emotions. And I'm upset and disappointed in that person for not taking that responsibility. But it never turns into that, well, I need to seek retribution now. I'd much rather them find mental health services and actually work on learning about consent and what proper boundaries are. Although, we have a long way to go with a lot of people. So that's my thoughts on breaking down a rape experience. If you'd like to share your experiences, please feel free to do so in the comments or in the Discord, wherever. I want to thank all my viewers and all the new subscribers. Hello and welcome. I really value your guys' input, and you say the sweetest things, and it really does help me with my own mental health and not feeling like I'm alone in this, because it's really difficult to feel a sense of community, especially around this sort of survivalhood, because it's so stigmatized still to talk about. But I'm very happy to try to open up that conversation so we can have a real conversation about it, about what it's really like, instead of just hearing a lot of uneducated or people who don't have experience in it who feel like they should advise us, because that can get irritating and hurtful. So sending love to everybody, and I hope all y'all are having good ones.